Welcome to the Debrief, where we talk with the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the headlines they're covering this week and where the story's going next. I'm Sarah Westwood, and I'm here today with politics editor Jim Antle. And Jim, President Biden is, at the time of this taping, on a high-profile trip through the Middle East. What are some of the challenges that he could be facing given the meetings that he's taking on that trip?
Well, number one, this is a region where he's not necessarily as well received as he is in Europe. He's not necessarily going to be compared favorably to former President Donald Trump, which is certainly not the case in Europe, where most of the European leaders embraced him as an improvement. So he faces that. Maybe a lot of the leaders over there don't necessarily care whether he wins re-election, so they don't have the same investment in having any deliverables achieved while he's there. So that's kind of a challenge. Obviously, Israel is an important relationship with the United States. It's something that has kind of been a point of contention within the Democratic Party. Israeli politics are in a state of flux right now. Government has recently collapsed, so he's facing some challenges there. And then as he heads to Saudi Arabia, clearly there are some energy goals that he has, and they're kind of downplaying that as a reason for the trip. But there are human rights concerns, and Biden campaigned on the idea that he was going to make the Saudi government a pariah state because of their involvement, based on U.S. intelligence findings, in the killing of Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi. So he's sort of facing some criticism for seeming to go to Saudi Arabia hat in hand with gas prices so high after having taken that strong stand. And then the question then becomes, is he going to be able to take anything home that he can call a victory?
Yeah, is there anything that he can really do with Saudi Arabia to, fix the gas price situation at home? Or is this really just sort of something that's going to cause mostly friction with the Democratic base and not many deliverables?
Well, certainly there are going to be critics within the Democratic Party from the human rights perspective. Of course, the more divisive issue among Democrats is really Israel. Biden is a more traditional Democrat, talks in a more pro-Israel fashion, even if maybe some of his subordinates aren't in line with that viewpoint, and has been governed as a relatively conventional Democrat on U.S.-Israeli relations. But the ascendant Democrats, the younger Democrats, the more left-wing and progressive Democrats, they take a very different perspective. They're more critical of Israel. They don't like the Israeli government's treatment of the Palestinians, and they're more sympathetic to the Palestinians in that dispute. So that's really a point for Democrats. But Saudi Arabia, can he get anything? The likelihood is it will be marginal. Whatever benefit it could be would be marginal, but they're really leaning very heavily into gas prices finally beginning to fall as a reason to have some hope about inflation, which is obviously still running at a 41-year high.
Yeah, when he comes home from the Middle East, he'll come home to inflation being at now 9.1%, as we learned. Is there anything that he can do rhetorically, policy-wise, to sort of limit the impact on his poll numbers at this point, or is this just sort of a baked-in disaster for him? It's so close to November.
Well, I think they're going to have to abandon their denial. So clearly, Biden's spending, the nearly $2 trillion spending bill that he signed after there was $3 trillion of stimulus money in the economy from the previous administration and Congress, that's the biggest thing that he personally has done to contribute to inflation. He's not been willing to admit that and has in fact continued to want to have more new spending. They keep trying to cut a deal for a Build Back Better plan. Now it keeps shrinking and shrinking, and so maybe its inflationary aspect will be lessened by that. But his desire for a legislative victory on that front and the two legislative victories that he's managed to have, those things all had some contribution to inflation. So can he back off of that and still have things to brag about? Secondly, obviously he's going to have to work with the Federal Reserve to get the growth of the money supply under control. But they're very invested in the idea that the spending has nothing to do with inflation, and that you could use spending to give people relief from inflation by cutting their costs. But pumping all of that money into the economy, too much money chasing too few goods, is Econ 101, what causes inflation.
Well, Jim, thank you so much for being here today. You can get more reporting from Jim and the rest of the political team at washingtonexaminer.com.